Welcome to Something Different, a place where every video is made to capture your attention and leave an impression. If you enjoy content that feels unique and engaging, subscribe and stay with us.
My husband told me to go stay with my mother until I had calmed down. I packed a bag, stepped into the elevator and said, "Okay." 3 days later, he came home expecting a woman who had thought it over and chosen the easier thing. What he found instead was his study cleared of everything I had brought into this marriage, his closet containing only his own clothes. And sitting on the kitchen counter, a manila folder with his full legal name printed on the tab. Not the name I'd used for 14 years, softened by familiarity. His legal name, the way a document uses it. Final. I heard later that he sat down in the kitchen for a long time before he opened it. That when he finally read the first page, the forensic accounting summary, highlighted in yellow, he had to read it twice before it made sense. He called me twice. I let it ring. The third time I answered and said, in the steadiest voice I have ever owned in my life, "You should probably find a lawyer." Then I hung up and went back to my room service dinner, and the novel I had been meaning to read for 3 years. But the beginning matters. It always does. And this one started long before that night. I had been waking at 5:30 for most of our marriage. Not because I had to. Because at that hour the day hadn't been claimed by anyone else yet. I'd make his coffee first. A light roast he'd discovered on a business trip to Portland. Specific beans from a specific shop, and he could tell when I substituted. And then I'd stand at the window of our 22nd floor apartment, watching Lake Michigan shift from black to gray to pale silver in gradual stages. It is a beautiful view. That's what I told people when they asked about the apartment. Beautiful view. In the early years my husband would shuffle in before 6, still soft with sleep, and we'd stand there together with our mugs, like two people watching something rare. That version of him felt like mine. By the time our 14th anniversary came and went with a dinner reservation he rescheduled twice, and then quietly canceled, I understood that something had changed shape. I just couldn't name the shape yet. I had put my landscape architecture practice on hold when we moved from Portland to Chicago for his career. His firm had a commission from a major lakefront development, the kind that would define a decade of work, and it made sense that we go where the work was. Temporary, we said, easily and lightly. The way you say things when you believe them. I could consult remotely, keep my connections, pick it back up when things settled. Ambition waits. I told myself that the way you tell yourself a light is still on in a room you haven't entered in a while. The morning of the Lakefront Commons groundbreaking gala, I pressed his shirts. The dry cleaner never got the plackets right, and he noticed. And set his cufflinks on the nightstand. He was in the shower with the door closed. He only did when he was on a call. I didn't comment on that. I had learned over time that certain observations were better kept between me and the window. "You remember the Moreland Group people?" he called out, when he emerged in a cloud of steam and cedar cologne. Ellard Moreland specifically. "He'll want to talk about the Eastern Walkway approach. Just nod and say it's in progress." "I know how to talk to clients," I said. He glanced at me, then at his phone. "Wear the gray tonight. The coral makes you look like you're trying too hard." I had bought that coral dress for a trip to the Amalfi Coast 2 summers ago. I put it on sometimes when he wasn't home, just to remember that color was something that existed for me. I went to the closet and reached past it. I wore the gray. Before I tell you what happened at that gala, I want to say something first. Thank you for being here and for listening to this. If you believe that a woman's quietest decisions can be the most powerful ones she ever makes, I hope you'll subscribe to this channel. It matters more than you know. Now let me tell you about the pendant. The event was held at the Hotel Meridian. The kind of place where everything is polished to a reflective sheen. And the waitstaff seem choreographed rather than trained. The Lakefront Commons project was my husband's largest commission to date. A mixed-use development, 40 stories, 3 city blocks along the lakefront. The kind of thing that gets a bronze plaque. There were speeches. There were architectural models under glass. There were renderings lit on screens the size of living room walls. I stood beside my husband for the first hour, as I had stood beside him at 100 of these events over 14 years. Close enough to be visible, quiet enough to be useful. I knew the names, the firm histories, the right questions to ask. I had made myself fluent in a room full of people who didn't know mine. She arrived at 8:15. I noticed her the way you notice a sound in a house at night that doesn't belong. Not loud. Just wrong. She was young, perhaps late 20s, in a dress the color of old champagne that moved when she did. She came through the main doors with the loose, deliberate ease of someone who believed she was expected. My husband saw her from across the room. I watched him see her. He introduced her to the Moreland table as Odile, his project lead on interior coordination. He didn't offer a last name. He said she was brilliant, then laughed in a way I recognized. The laugh he used with investors when he needed them to feel included in something. She shook my hand and held it a moment too long and said, "You must be so proud of everything he's built." The phrasing arrived with a slight pressure on "he's built." Not "you've built together." Not even a nod toward the decade and a half of events I'd attended, names I'd memorized, hands I'd shaken on his behalf. I was still composing my response when I saw it. At the base of her throat, on a slim gold chain, hung a small pendant, amber, the shape of a raindrop, with a thin vein of darker color running through the center. I had given that pendant to my husband on our 10th anniversary. I had commissioned it specifically. The amber sourced, the setting designed, the chain chosen to match a cord he already wore. He had worn it under his shirts for about a year, and then one morning he had come home from a conference in Denver and told me it was gone. Lost somewhere, he said. He looked apologetic. He seemed, in that moment, like a man who was sorry about a small real thing. I stared at the pendant now. The amber caught the chandelier light and threw it back in a warm, familiar way. I had held that stone in my hands before it was set. She turned to my husband and said quietly, in the register of a voice that has become accustomed to a certain kind of intimacy, "B. The Morelands are asking about the model." B. A single letter. Not his name the way I said his name, worn smooth by 14 years of daily use. B. The way a person says a sound that has become too personal for syllables. He touched her elbow when he turned away. Not long, not obvious, but I had spent 14 years learning to read the small language of this person's body. I understood what I was reading. I stood with my champagne glass and made a decision that arrived not as anger but as clarity. There is a difference. Anger is something you have to manage. Clarity is just information, arriving in full. Later in the evening, when the table conversation created a natural pause, I said, "Odile, that's a beautiful pendant." She reached up and touched it reflexively. The way you do when someone names something you'd prefer they hadn't seen. "A gift," she said, "from someone very important to me." I thought I recognized it, I said. "I have an eye for amber." I smiled. She looked at me for a beat longer than she should have, then looked away. The rest of the evening I performed as I always performed. I spoke to the right people, asked the right questions, laughed at the right pitch. My husband, when he noticed me, saw only that I wasn't causing difficulty. He had always mistaken composure for compliance. It was a mistake that had cost him more than he knew yet. In the car home, he told me I had seemed distant with the Moreland Group partner's wife. I reminded him that I had spoken with her for nearly half an hour about her daughter's equestrian program and her older son's application to Dartmouth. He said, "You know what I mean." That sentence, in our marriage, had always meant, "I have an impression and I will not be burdened with facts." In our bedroom, while I was hanging up the gray dress, he appeared in the doorway with the look of a man who had prepared a speech on the drive home. "What you said to Odile tonight, about the pendant, was unnecessary. She is critical to this project. She is a professional relationship and you treated her like a threat." He paused. "That kind of pettiness is beneath you." I looked at him steadily. I paid her a compliment. "You were making her uncomfortable." "I'll be more careful," I said. He studied my face for a moment, clearly wrong-footed by the absence of the argument he had prepared for. "I think you need time to think," he said. "Go stay with your mother for a few days. Clear your head. When you've calmed down, we can have an actual conversation." He said it the way he said things at the firm when the decision had already been made, and the discussion was merely procedural. I looked at him for a long moment. "Okay," I said. He blinked. He had expected resistance. Resistance was something he knew how to manage. Compliance confused him. I packed that night while he was in bed. I packed carefully, and I packed smart. And when I left in the morning, I had everything in my bag that I would need for what came next, which was not, as he imagined, a few days of quiet reflection followed by an apology. My mother lives in Evanston, the tall Victorian house with the wraparound porch, where I grew up, and where my drafting table still sat in the upstairs room beside the window. She was awake when I arrived. Because my mother is always awake when she needs to be. She opened the door, looked at my bag and said simply, "Come in, I'll put the kettle on." I sat at her kitchen table. The same one I had eaten breakfast at for 18 years, and felt the particular comfort of being in a place that existed before your marriage. That remembered you as a whole person. "He sent me away," I said. "I know," she said with a certainty that told me she had been watching for a long time. She set the tea in front of me and then went to the junk drawer, the one with old batteries and rubber bands and coupons that had expired, and she pulled out a small spiral notebook. She set it on the table between us without ceremony. Inside, in her careful handwriting, were entries going back 2 years, dates and brief notations. Freya called, sounded wrong. The Denver conference, she said the pendant was lost, didn't sound sure. Arrived at Thanksgiving thinner, asked if she was eating, said yes too quickly. She laughed at something he said, but her eyes didn't. I read for a long time. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked. She wrapped both hands around her mug. "You weren't ready to hear it, and I knew that the moment you were ready, you wouldn't need me to say it." She paused. "Are you ready now?" "Yes," I said. She reached into the drawer again and set a business card on the table. The edges were slightly worn, as if it had been held and put back more than once. "Claudette Marsh, Family Law." On the back in different handwriting. "For when you know." "The woman from the library fundraiser," my mother said. "She gave it to me 3 years ago and told me to pass it along when the time came." She tilted her head. "I think the time has come." Claudette Marsh's office was on the 16th floor in the Loop, with a view of the river and a waiting room that smelled of cedar and quiet competence. She shook my hand with the grip of someone who had been expecting me longer than I had been expecting myself. And she opened a drawer. Before I had finished explaining why I was there. "I know your husband's firm," she said. "I've been watching that building go up for 2 years, and I've had 4 conversations in the past 18 months, with people connected to that project." She set a folder on the desk. "My forensic accountant flagged a line item in his corporate card statements last spring, a recurring monthly payment to a vendor listed as OV Design Consultation." She turned the folder so I could read it. 14 months, consistent amounts, deposited to an account in the name of Odile Vance. She paused. "That is not the billing pattern of a contracted consultant. That is the billing pattern of an arrangement. Someone is trying to make look like something else." I sat with that for a moment. The way you sit with something you already knew, but hadn't yet heard out loud. Otto, the building manager, kept a logbook. He had started it years ago after a security incident and had never stopped, filling spiral-bound ledgers with careful entries. Who came in, who was a guest of whom, what time, what day. He kept them in a cabinet in the basement maintenance room surrounded by the smell of old paper and machine oil. And when I went to see him, he looked relieved in the way of a person who has been holding something uncomfortable for a long time and has been waiting for the right person to hand it to. "Miss Freya," he said. He had always called me that. "I'm glad you came down." He had entries going back 11 months. A young woman with champagne-colored hair, logged twice weekly, listed as a guest of my husband. Tuesday evenings most consistently, some Saturday mornings. He had given her a building access card 7 months ago, at my husband's instruction, without being asked to tell me. He looked at his hands when he said that part. "I should have come to you," he said. "You're telling me now," I said. "That's what matters." He tore out the relevant pages and handed them to me, then reached into the back of the ledger and produced a small envelope he had saved from when Odile had left it by the mail slots. Inside was a hotel dry cleaning receipt, with a room number that I confirmed through other means. Was a suite my husband had been keeping at the Meridian for the past year. Billed to a corporate account under a different name. "You always put those garden sketches up in the lobby when you first moved in," Otto said as I was leaving. The blueprints. I always liked them. Wondered why you stopped. I had forgotten about those. I'd pinned 2 concept drawings up in the first month, excited about a new project. My husband had taken them down within weeks. They looked unprofessional, he said, too casual for the building's aesthetic. I hadn't put anything on that corkboard since. I'm going to start again, I told Otto. He nodded once, as if he'd been waiting for that answer for a while too. The move took one day. 4 people from a company called Clean Slate Relocations, professional and quiet, who moved through the apartment like a tide going out, taking exactly what was mine, leaving everything that was his exactly where it stood. My drafting table, the framed blueprints from before the marriage, my grandmother's china, my father's woodworking tools, 14 years of small accumulations sorted and claimed. I left his study for last. On his desk, I placed the folder, the forensic accounting summary on one side, tabbed and highlighted, the key figures in yellow. Otto's logbook pages behind that, dated and sequential, and in the center, one photograph printed cleanly on a sheet of white paper. The amber pendant at Odil's throat, time-stamped from the night of the gala. On the back, in my own handwriting, I have an eye for amber. No letter. The document said everything that needed saying, in the language my husband had always preferred, documented, verifiable, final. I locked up, took the elevator down and thanked the building for the view. He called the next morning. I let it ring twice before I answered. Where are your things, he said, not a question. In storage, I said. Climate controlled, you don't need to worry about them. A long pause. Freya, my name in his mouth, sounded the way it had started to sound years ago. Like a file reference, not a person. This is theatrical, you don't have to do this. I filed for divorce yesterday, I said. The papers are on your desk. My attorney will be in touch by end of business today. I paused. I'd suggest you not be alone when you read the forensic accounting section. It's quite thorough. He came to the hotel. I met him in the lobby, in a chair by the window facing the lake, because I chose the location and I chose the terms. He sat across from me in his best boardroom posture. The one he wore when a deal had begun to slip, and he still believed he could negotiate his way back. This is an overreaction, he said. Odile is a professional. With a monthly stipend, a building access card, and a piece of jewelry you told me you lost in Denver, I said. My voice stayed level. Tell me which part is professional. He looked at his hands for a moment. The financial arrangements can be explained. My attorney has already explained them to your board of directors. I said. She had a meeting there yesterday afternoon. The Moreland Group representative was present. He went very still. You would not. I did, I said. The color in his face changed in a way I had never seen before. Everything we have, you would burn it all down. You built it, I said. You told me that regularly and clearly. So technically, you're the one making the choices about how it ends. He was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, the boardroom posture was gone. He looked like a person suddenly. Not a position. What is it that you want? My name back, I said. My practice, and the amber pendant. Claudette called the following morning, with the distinct warmth of someone whose patience has paid off precisely on schedule. The board had called an emergency session. My husband had arrived convinced he could manage the narrative. But the forensic documentation had a clarity that narrative couldn't bend. The Moreland Group had asked to review their partnership agreement. He was placed on administrative suspension pending investigation. It was, Claudette said, something to witness. Odile came to see me 10 days later. She looked like someone who had recently had several conversations she hadn't expected and was still sorting through them. She held her bag in both hands and looked at me directly, which I respected. He told me you were difficult, she said. He told me he was waiting for the right moment to leave, that it had been over for years. He told me the pendant was lost in Denver, I said. She looked at the floor. We sat by the window and she told me about the Connecticut houses he'd shown her. Listings I recognized, in fact, because I'd once suggested that area for a weekend property, and he'd dismissed it as too far from the city. She told me about the timeline that kept adjusting, the moment she had started to understand that the timeline would never stop moving. I listened without interrupting. because I knew the particular texture of what she was describing. I thought I was different, she said. I know, I said, so did I for a long time. Before she left, I gave her Claudette's card. She is very good, I said, and she will not be charmed by him. Odile held the card for a moment, then put it in her coat pocket with the deliberateness of someone who has made a decision. At the door she paused. I hope you get your practice back, she said. I believe that she meant it. The mediation concluded in 3 sessions. By the final one, my husband had stopped arguing over the furniture and the art he had once called decorative clutter. He signed where he was directed to sign. When we finished, he stood at the window for a moment, a man in an excellent suit looking out at a city that had always cooperated with his plans and had recently decided to stop. Freya, he said. I picked up my folder from the table. I don't know how to apologize, he said. I've never known how. I know, I said. That was always the problem. I walked out. Claudette held the elevator. We rode down in the comfortable silence of people who have completed something difficult and done it well. 6 weeks later, I signed a lease on a studio in River North Light, drafting table by the window, my old blueprints framed on the walls, my name on the door, Freya Aldcroft, landscape architecture. I had kept my license current through all of it. Through every dinner I'd attended in his place, and every weekend I'd spent managing the social architecture of his career. The license had sat in a folder in the bottom of a filing cabinet, waiting with more patience than I had given it credit for. My first commission came from the City Parks Department, through a woman I had collaborated with before we left Portland, a connection I had kept alive through yearly emails and the occasional call. She remembered my work. She had followed the firm's trajectory and then followed what happened to it, and she called me 2 weeks after the news of the investigation became public. The project was a green corridor along the lakefront, adjacent to the lakefront commons site, which was now under new project management. Its timeline restructured by circumstances its founder had arranged for himself. My corridor would be finished first. I noted that without satisfaction, just as a fact. My mother called the morning the studio opened. She asked how it felt. Like putting on a coat I'd been carrying for years, I said, and finding it still fits. Otto framed the 2 lobby sketches he had kept from when we first moved in, and asked if he could put them back on the corkboard in the building lobby. I told him to hang one there. The other came home with me and went on the wall above the drafting table, because it was drawn by a version of me who knew exactly what she was doing. And I wanted to see her every morning when I sat down to work. The amber pendant I had returned to me during mediation, listed in the settlement as personal property of verified origin. I wore it once, to see what it felt like. It felt like a thing that had been somewhere it shouldn't have been, and come back changed. I took it to a jeweler on Michigan Avenue and had the amber reset into a new piece entirely. Different setting, different chain, something that looked like what it was. A beginning that had found a better shape. I wear it sometimes when I am going somewhere that matters. And when the light catches it, I think not of what was lost, but of what I went and found. Some mornings I wake before the alarm and stand at the studio window making coffee the way I like it, watching the city come awake below, my schedule, my colors, my version of what this life looks like. And I think about the woman who packed that bag in the dark and said, "Okay," in a voice her husband mistook for surrender. He sent me away to clear my head, not knowing that I had already been clearing it for years. Not knowing that the quiet he thought would break me was the same quiet I had learned to work in, to plan in, to build in. He told me to calm down. I went and built something instead.